And we are glad to start on this note because our next panel, which is coming up, again, is how, we provide impetus to the entire industry, and how do we institutionalize the Indian impact investing industry through policy and some of these conversations where we can bring some more standardization. And what role can policy actually play in, institutionalizing the efforts of impact investing is what this panel is going to talk about. So it is our honor to welcome the panel speakers for the next panel. So I'd like to invite on stage Dharini Mathur, Head of Strategy, Policy and General Counsel, Prosperate Growth Fund, Shalabh Tandon, South Asia Regional Head of Operations and Climate Change, IFC, Sumesh Girotra, Investment Lead, Technology and Startup, British High Commission, and steering this conversation with his decades of experience in the policy area is Dhruba Purkayastha, Director, Growth and Institutional Advancement, Council on Energy, Environment and Water, CEEW. So I welcome all of you on stage. Please do the honors.
Apologies and sorry for kind of being outside. Thank you all and good morning for this first panel discussion, Navigating the Policy Landscape of Impact Investing. I have with me Mr. Rajiv Kumar from SIDBI, Sumesh Girotra from BII, UK government, UK government, Shalabh Tandon from IFC, and Dharini Mathur from Prosperate Impact Fund, right? I can call it an impact fund, but ex-IFC too. I am Dhruba. I am currently with the Council for Energy, Environment and Water, one of India's leading policy think tanks. Thank you. Policy and impact investing. What has state got to do with impact investing? That's the kind of thinking. And why are we all into kind of figuring out the issue of impact? Let me start with giving you a last 10 years perspective. Of roughly 10 years, we have been into this, what is called the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. As we reach 2024, roughly 9 years into it, and the agenda which puts in, where I'm getting the agenda which is called Finance for Development. The last one is in Addis Ababa, the next one is in Spain in 25. The most recent report says the shortage of investing towards SDGs is of the order of 3 to 4 trillion per annum. So we are in a world where there is commitment, there is sign-off from hundreds of countries on finance for development, FFD3, and then we come 10 years later and we see the annual shortfall at around 3 to 4 trillion dollars per annum. And this is not climate, I'm talking of development investment, both from public and private finance. This session is about what can policy do to enable private commercial finance and direct it towards impact. At the end of the day, private capital, well, it's supposed to, its religion is to make the right returns. Its religion is to make the right risk-adjusted returns. Why is it supposed to be doing what state is supposed to do? Or are we doing it? Are we here from funds, from development financial institutions, both domestic and otherwise, and bilateral development agencies, all trying to somehow figure out this pathway as to what policy could do? And is there a role for policy? Well captured in, if any of you are interested, it's very well captured in a book by the ex-governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, who basically brings this out as a conflict between value and values. Value is what private capital looks at, and what values, social, environmental values, is what we want capital to get directed to. Let me start with Mr. Rajiv from SIDBI, and I know that you have to leave soon, but thank you very much for being here. SIDBI calls itself the India's DFI. Is India's DFI down on MSME, down the pyramid? So could you just enlighten us on how this anchor role is being played by SIDBI, particularly as a government-owned financial institution, in terms of directing itself towards impact? Over to you, Rajiv.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me here. As Durvaji said, SIDBI is a development financial institution, and our mandate is to promote finance and develop the MSME sector in India, micro, small, and medium enterprise sector. And SIDBI has been serving this mandate by way of various verticals, various business activities. We have been very active in the microfinance area since long. In fact, I served a long period of my career in the Eastern UP, Varanasi, Lucknow, etc. So there I've been closely working with the microfinance institutions, and we could see the impact on the ground. So overall, SIDBI has nurtured more than 150 microfinance institutions, and many of them have now become large entities. In fact, about 8 of them, 9 of them have already got the license for small finance banks. So that is one. Parallelly, we have also been working on the startup side. SIDBI runs a program called Fund of Fund. It's a Government of India program wherein SIDBI is managing a fund of rupees 10,000 crore, and we are supporting AIFs, alternate investment funds, who are then investing into startups, and many of them are basically directed towards early stage growth stage startups. Now, recently SIDBI has also changed its focus towards climate financing, and we have set up a dedicated vertical called Green Climate Finance Vertical, and we are focusing on financing the MSMEs. Basically, we are working on 5 theme areas: renewable energy, energy efficiency, electric mobility, circular economy, and adaptation. So these 5 theme areas we are working, and we sort of started this vertical around 2.5 years back. And in a period of 2.5 years, we have been able to create green loans of around more than $1 billion, around 9,000 crores worth of green loans we could deliver. And these are all ESG filtered, and M&E, etc. are being taken care of these loans. But obviously 1 billion is not very small amount for the country. So we have been trying to expand this and not keep it only to SIDBI, so that we can bring other players, other financial institutions into the play. And recently we had submitted a proposal to Green Climate Fund and got approval of the proposal, and probably that is going to be one of the largest program for MSMEs, not only in India, the entire world. It's a 4 billion program which is going to be launched, and this will be leveraging 200 million US dollar from Green Climate Fund, and with private financing which it will be attracting. It's going to be a 4 billion program, mainly aimed at the micro sector and the small sectors, so that we, and also mitigation is 60% of the total outlay, and 40% is going towards the adaptation side, wherein we are going to touch lives of more than 11 billion people in next 3 years. So that is the scale of the program, and through this platform, I would like to urge, all the players who are looking for impact investing to come and become a partner for this in this program. So I'll stop here.
No,
Thank you.
thank you. Thanks, Rajiv. But before I let you go, I think it's great to hear financial inclusion, microfinance, green loans, MSME, all of them appear to be very hard to finance, difficult to finance sectors. General understanding is commercial banking, commercial finance stays away. What is it that that makes you go for these sectors? Does this lead to higher NPAs for you? Does this initiative of green climate, supporting MSMEs on energy efficiency, what is the picture emerging out? Just 2 minutes short.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. We all, in fact, even when we started, we also had this perception in our mind that if we go towards this emerging, untried, untested area, whether there will be huge NPAs, there will be huge losses, would there be an impact or not? So, but what we could figure it out that we are having the lowest NPS across our portfolio under the green loans portfolio. Moreover, we have been able to create impact, as well as we have been able to reach out to those people, particularly the DRE segments, wherein the main challenge which India was facing, that we have not been able to finance small solar projects, the small rooftop project. Bigger solar projects are happening across, and we are way ahead in that target. But small solar rooftop was not happening. We have been able to, through proper restructuring of the product and obviously providing some carrot and incentive under the scheme, we have been able to finance large number of solar rooftop projects in MSMEs and through our sensitization and other programs. And particularly also, I would also like to mention, we have launched a few risk-sharing facilities, particularly on the energy efficiency side, e-mobility, and waste management. So these are emerging, untried, untested areas, and on the strength of these credit enhancement mechanism and risk-sharing facilities, also we have been able to drive this market and keep the risks at a significantly low levels. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Rajiv. Thank you. Do you need to leave now?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Just the key takeaways for the audience to note. So green is not poor credit quality. That's what you're saying. It is DRE, distributed rooftop, is not poor investment quality. You're bringing that to fore because you're taking those movements. So I take away these two, and it just may be a lesson to others in terms of thinking around this part. So small is not bad, necessarily not higher risk. Thank you so much, Rajiv. Sumesh, just coming to you, again taking the route of trying to think on how British development I should not call it development assistance anymore because it's not ODA to India either. But becoming an investor, as a state investor, you've had a large number of initiatives, which it does include one of the large infrastructure funds too, being invested in, and a few others which have actually been MSME focused, a small fund focused, NEEF and etc. But I'm not very sure on that. But in this role that you are looking at as a lens of investing in India, how do you see the landscape for British public investments in India?
Thank you, Dhruba. So,
Or using public investments to crowd in maybe others too.
yeah, I think that's a really good start. So maybe I'll just take a minute to give you a context of where, who we are and where we stand in the, Indian impact investment ecosystem. So my name is Sumesh. I come from the government of UK. The government of UK invests in India through various instruments and various vehicles. The first one is directly on its own balance sheet. That's what very, very few countries in the world do. It's directly investing from its own balance sheet into equity, into AIF funds in India, which align with the investment thesis. So that's one. Second is we have a primary investment vehicle, BII in India. BII has a fairly large portfolio of more than 2 billion in India, investing into various sectors. And of course, there are colleagues who are here and they'll speak on panels subsequently. So that's second. Thirdly, I think Rajiv spoke about GCF. So UK government directly is one of the largest contributors in the Green Climate Fund. And there have been very recent top-up commitments announced by the government of UK in GCF. Fourthly, there are other multilaterals like the Private Infrastructure Development Group, PIDGE. There is, of course, central funding coming into the World Bank, IFCs of the world, and the others. So there's a whole host of instruments and institutions that are supported at the back end by the government of UK. I represent the India office, which has a portfolio of about $500 million. We primarily invest in areas which are agreed centrally with the government of India. As of now, we are investing in climate and technology. So these are the two key areas that we are looking at investing heavily into. The thesis from the very beginning has been, Dhruba, to invest in sectors which are really tough. As sitting on the government, there is risk appetite which is slightly higher and higher appetite to fail. So we are trying to invest in areas like, for example, adaptation. We're seeing less than 1% capital going into adaptation. So that's something that has been on the cards, and we are in the market to look at opportunities on how we can invest in climate adaptation sectors. Second is technology. So in the policy landscape, I think Dhruva spoke about $3 to $4 trillion gap. This is not the kind of money that can come into India, immediately or in the next few years, maybe in the current decade. So how can we use technology to catalyze and bring that quantum of money down? How can we make companies who are delivering on impact, more and more efficient through use of these technologies? So I think on that, I think from our past experience, from our experience of investing in India, our top key learnings, have been that India needs a huge pool of capital, and it is not just equity. We are providers of equity directly from our balance sheet. Of course, BII has a wide range of institutions. Similarly, other institutions that we have supported provide a whole host of instruments. But there is also a need of, huge debt markets, to work, more and more vibrant debt market to work in India. I'll just give you an example. In the UK, there are tax incentives for people, for individuals who are investing in, startups, who are investing in early stage enterprises, who are taking that risk. If that is something we could work out for India, if that is something which the government could support in creating an ecosystem for retail investors. Currently, we are seeing billions going into the listed markets. If a small pool of that money could be routed to impact, you could call it climate, health, or whatever sector you want, and incentives built around it, that will make the whole vibrant ecosystem, go live. Maybe I'll pause now and come back.
No, I just have a follow-on question on that part. Because this is public capital, whichever way we want to look at it, and by the way, the SDG financing gap is global, it's not, we're talking of a global gap of trillions of dollars. However, that you can apportion with a 1 billion, 1.5 billion population on 8 billion world, it will sort of come out proportionately. But if one were to look at British investments and in saying, public capital remains scarce, so what is it that can be done in order to crowd in more, de-risk more, and that's where you're coming to get the debt. Any thoughts on those lines as to what British investment could do in terms of leveraging what's already there, whether it is, as you rightly pointed out, shift the large institutional and retail equity if you could do with tax advantages and tax offsets. That's a great point. But in addition to that, if I may just push you to the next level.
I'll just speak on two. There are many points but I'll just focus on top two. Number one, I mentioned about the domestic financial institutions. Look, the financial institutions, LPs sitting outside India look at India very differently. And there is a very different, a very cozy, an internal view that Indian LPs and Indian institutions have on Indian enterprises and funds. If Indian LPs and Indian institutions can be more adventurous, can have a higher risk-taking appetite to invest in Indian funds and Indian businesses, I think it will change the way how international investors look at India. In the previous session, somebody spoke about, somebody was complaining that a lot of international LPs say that they are providing catalytic capital, but they keep waiting for someone else to be that catalyst. So I think the answer to that would be, the international investors have India, we are in India, but there are different decision-making standpoints in the organizations. But if we can, as an Indian investor, as an Indian DFI, show higher degree of confidence, I'm sure that will lead to more mobilization into these sectors. Second is blended finance and innovative instruments. There is a lot more in terms of regulatory flexibility that can come in through blended finance and innovative instruments, first loss. Can we have more flexibility for international investors to come in with different pools of capital, as has been seen in other countries? That is again something that could make the way for blended for higher mobilization.
No, thanks, Umesh, thanks. Valid and useful points to be noted. Let me just turn around and come to you, Shalabh, to start with the a very overarching question on this session, which is navigating. We'll come to navigation later. But what is it that policy could do? And by policy, what I mean, policy for the real economy and the financial sector too. You can include regulation too in that, because financial sector is one of the most heavily regulated sectors. Well, while they can need to be separated or they can be joined, without getting into that, what policy intervention can enable more commercial finance, including that for private sector MDBs flow in? Where are we stuck? What is it that policy could do?
So I think, yeah. So I think from our perspective, and we've seen many policy interventions at the sector level in a country, right? There has to be a complete holistic view on combining various fragmented pieces of policy and regulation that exist in various ecosystems at different phases of life, and bring it all together in a holistic manner when we look at impact investing. That's missing. Government has made the right announcement on climate taxonomy, bringing it all together. Dhruva, you are very well aware, and we've participated together on many task forces on that. Similarly, can a taxonomy of sorts be developed for impact, starting with just a clear definition of what is impact investing? What does it mean by impact investing? How do we measure it? What are the rules of the game? What is the framework, etc.? That will help bring in many international LPs who want to see impact along with financial return, pour in money into the country, including very large institutions. And I was also, in the previous session, Somesh, you rightly mentioned, a lot of the LPs feel that they are catalytic investors, and the GP point was absolutely correct. We keep asking the same question, who others are investing in it? So the policy can come at three levels. One is, in any landscape, we have to look at demand, supply, and ecosystem. The demand side is the GPs, the consumers, who are the recipients of the capital or whatever you might want to call it. Can we build capacity there? The second is on the supply side, which is the financials, like it could be LPs, VC funds, funders, pension funds, family offices, international. What are the rules of the game that can be shaped to bring in that supply into a particular country in that context? And I think on the ecosystem side, there is a lot going on already there. Let's not say that we don't have policies. The entire renewable energy revolution has developed on the back of policy on the ecosystem side. Similarly, can it be replicated in many other different sectors so that private sector capital can come in? So taking an entire holistic view on demand, supply, ecosystem and bringing that money in would help.
Yeah, thanks, Shalabh. Just to pick up on, so if I'm getting you right here, the issue is everybody defines impact as it is convenient for them.
Yeah.
Very simply put, capital defines impact. You have the regulator defining impact under ESG in some manner. To my mind, that's more compliance, and that has been there for ages. I mean, last 20 years ago also, we did have social safeguards and environmental safeguards to be passed through for any World Bank IFC investments, right? So performance standards had to be. So the question is, that is compliance, right?
Yeah.
This is a compliance to existing laws of the land, compliance to what probably global harmonized standards are. But is that impact? No. It is not, right? So if it is not impact, then therefore you're indicating to saying, while returns are easily measurable in whichever way, may get qualified by risk and called risk-adjusted returns, but we have no metric by which any investor having delivered X amount of impact, I'm just talking loosely, and that is a framework which probably is required for capital to deliver impact.
So I think a number of players in the audience might be aware and might have their own definitions of impact. As IFC, we convened with a bunch of stakeholders what are called OPIM, or Operating Principles for Impact Management, where we clearly define what impact investment is. And the way, and I think it is largely accepted and based on the EU
principles. Is it measurable?
Yeah, it is. So how is impact defined? Impact investment is defined as an intent. The word intent is important. Intent to create positive environment, social and economic impact. Three things: environment, social and economic. It is not enough to say that you avoid negative impact. What you are talking about is compliance and avoidance of negative impact, which is all the ESG safeguard policy. And intent to positively create a positive impact around environment, social or economic, that's impact, along with financial returns. So both are required, financial returns as well as impact. And the third is around measurability, transparency, and maybe independent verification. If all these principles are there under the OPIM, we call it impact investment, and that can
under
drive
OPIM.
all the OPIM. And that can drive the entire frameworks around it. There are about, I think, 180 signatories to it. I think 4 funds from India are signatories to those OPIM principles, including the omnivore colleagues who are here.
No, thanks. This is great, Shalabh. Great point. What basically you're driving at is, I am an ESG mutual fund. I'm an ESG investor. I invest in good ESG scored companies. Is not impact investing. Is not impact investing. It's compliance, it's good compliance, and it's good governance. It's not impact investing. Sorry, the last question is, there is a need to clarify this in the market, in the investment fraternity, because what is understood, and then it takes the shape of greenwashing at some levels, and that gets scored. There's a need for communication for the markets to get this message clearly. Any thoughts?
No, absolutely agree. And I think that's where players like MDBs, DFI, other signatories who are part of the OPIM principles can work with government and policymakers for doing this advocacy. And maybe at some stage this leads to our own version on impact taxonomy in the country.
Thank you. Dharini, sorry, not really last, but coming to nuts and bolts a little more, then my first question is, given where you are in your stage, you can feel free to talk about your initiatives, but coming back, you have seen this landscape for many years in the development, I would say, MDBs, but private investments. And one of the constraints or one of the frictions that has always been is the difficulty in capital flowing across boundaries and other ways. Where are the points that can need not go into the details, but where are the key barriers to this flow of international finance? My related question is, we get investment through funds, private equity funds, venture, impact. You have public equity, mutual funds, and you have large institutional investors globally. They go through markets. They go through financial markets. Part of it also goes through the banking system. Where is it that this friction, these costs are deterring, apart from having taken those points of taxonomy, standardization, impact market? Any legal and regulatory kind of impediments that we see at a broad level?
Thanks, Prabhav. So I actually want to step back and start from the point that we've all been talking about. There's need for trillions of dollars. So in IFC, I think estimates 3 trillion for climate, over 500 billion for financial inclusion, etc., just in India, right? And then this is essentially a demand and supply issue. So like that's the demand side. And then on the supply side, you have DFIs, you have private funds like ourselves. And ultimately, you think about where these will go where conditions are most beneficial to them. And that's where I think policy and the government has a central catalytic role to ensure that they have a clear playbook in place. And I'm a huge believer, I talk about playbooks very often. It needs to have a playbook in place which ensures that that money comes here. I mean, you juxtapose this with what the US has done with the IRA, the EU Green Deal. I mean, the extent of those subsidies and those measures are so significant that private capital is going there. I mean, there's private capital going to Texas, for example, right? Because those conditions have been created for it to go there. And that's diverting away from India because those conditions exist. So if governments were to think about it, and if governments were to prioritize the various impact sectors, they need to look at it from that lens. Now, what are regulations and laws? These are tools that the government has, and these tools need to speak to that playbook. Currently, I think we've all talked about it. I think Somesh brought it up as well. Our regulations and just do not speak to that. I mean, A, there is no playbook. A, there is no sort of overarching, there's sectoral and various things that act in a siloed way, but there is no cohesive playbook to which all regulations speak. And I'll take a simple example. We're trying to raise a private fund, right? The SEBI regulations on AIFs do not allow junior-senior structures. They do not allow, different priority payments. I mean, I can understand the reason why this was in place. It came in because of some sort of evergreening concerns. But actually, if you look at it, the lenders who are, the investors who are providing the junior capital are not regulated lenders. They are not, they are not the ones who any evergreening concern should apply to. GCF, IFC, the UK FCDO, none of these investors are actually going to participate in evergreening. So this is, you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And this is the classic case of your regulations not working in tandem with your stated objective of bringing in more capital, right? Another example on this is on the debt side. I completely agree that we have, you need debt that is properly structured, whether it's climate or inclusion. And Dhruva, you and I have battled this at IFC for many years. A common blended finance tool is a partial credit guarantee. In India, you have a 2% cap on guarantee fees, which is often completely at odds with the minimum concessionality principle that exists. And often the response is, but this is supposed to be concessional capital, 2% is plenty. It's not actually. It has to be linked to credit spreads. It cannot be in a vacuum. So, I mean, this is one of the pet peeves, I think, that your regulations do not speak to your stated objectives. And I think ultimately that will only happen if you have a playbook. You cannot have, random measures which are almost reactive in a sectoral way. I think you need a cohesive playbook. So I think that that's absolutely important.
Thanks a lot. Very, very critical points. A year ago, I was sort of almost doing a fireside chat with SEBI ED on a similar subject when these issues had come up. So effectively, just kind of taking it further with you, Dharini, is when you cannot have different classes of shares in an AIF, whatever so you are basically throwing out the concept of blended finance. There is no blended finance possible, whether it is a debt structure on an AIF or it's a equity structure on an AIF. I have no different classes of shares with different risk returns are not possible within the same pool, whether you look at it as a credit fund or whether you look at it as a RIG fund. Apart from saying that 2% on the first loss or on the guarantee pricing is way out of whack, you're basically talking blended finance. There is no enabler of blended finance by the policy and regulation. So when we talk blended finance, there's a lot of initiatives on blended finance, but they cannot happen here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Shalabh, when we started working on the blended finance for climate in India report, this was when I was back at IFC, we had multiple conversations on it. It was a very new concept, but in the last 2 years, I think blended finance is, the corridors of North Block are ringing with blended finance. It's not just at Prabhav that we're discussing it, right? But there is the intent to bring in blended finance, but the necessary enablers that need to be in place for it to actually come in are absent. And so I think we need to change that.
So even if it were to be a GCF money, which is a long-term 2%, 40 years, that sits junior on a pot, on a structure. Not allowed. Exactly. So that's not allowed as whatever leveraging that could have been done by development finance cannot happen within the country very clearly. So needs to come from outside. And now I go to my sort of question of saying, then if the money needs to come from outside here, then you have ECB if it comes through a direct borrowing, or if it is through any thoughts on last question for you, Dharini, sorry, on does an IFC help, International Financial Center help, IFSC, a gift city help in easing this out to flows to India?
Well, there's a theoretical answer and a practical answer. The theoretical answer is that it should help. The practical answer is, and this is entirely, my views are personal on this, I think the regulator there is also looking to the government of India for guidance on what they can permit. So while technically SEBI regulations don't apply, foreign exchange regulations don't apply, in effect, they're not going to do something completely different. My understanding is, for example, from conversations, that they will not allow a junior-senior equity structure either, just as an example. There may be some debt equity possible, and I think at IFC that has been done in Gift City, but they're not going to do it for private funds, for private LPs. So I think there's it depends answer, and I don't think an it depends answer is clear policy. And we will all agree that you need to have clear policy. The answer cannot be it depends. So, therefore, I think the IFSC currently is of limited benefit, but I think that is an opportunity waiting to happen. So maybe you gentlemen on task force can change that.
No, thank you so much. Policy cannot be, it depends. I can't just agree more with you on this. But coming back to what we have the last 5 minutes, is to ask all of you to take a 1-minute shot at saying, if we need to mobilize impact investment and impact defined broadly, what would you recommend from a policy, institutional, regulatory action? 2 points for impact capital to flow in, not necessarily from outside India, but also directing capital, domestic intermediation to impact. Starting with you, Sumesh.
I hope I'm audible. Okay. So I think maybe top 2-3 points. First of all, regulatory sandboxes. Can we create regulatory sandboxes for, in trying out different instruments? Can the regulator facilitate pilots? I think Dharani and Dhruva both spoke a lot about blended finance. So I will not get into, the more benefits that accrue. But if some of those could be tested, of course, the regulator does have, their own concerns. But if there is a mechanism through which it can be tested in certain ways, investors do pilots all the time. So if that is one, if there could be more flexibility on that. And adding to the same point, we spoke about ESG. I think Shalabh did speak about ESG. ESG is compliance. It's been around for 20 years. But the reason that last 20 years, huge sums of capital have also not flown into India is also one of the reasons is, we've been a little lax on ESG, I feel. On governance, we are a little lax. I think that needs to be strengthened far more than where it is now, especially for foreign LPs. One bad apple can make the whole apple cart look. So, and I think things travel, messages travel, LPs are connected with each other. So that's again a huge impediment for capital to come in. So that has to be strengthened. SEBI has already played a role. It's not that government has not acted upon it, but SEBI has played a role. They've created ESG rating system and all of that. But I think more strengthening needs to go there. The last point I wanted to mention was, again, I spoke about retail participation and higher domestic pools of capital. To add to that, huge banking, State Bank, SIDBI, other huge private sector lending institutions have PSL, private priority sector guidelines. So can some of that be earmarked for example, certain industry which needs capital, impact, climate, adaptation, tech, whatever taxonomy throws up. But can some of that be earmarked and lead to more confidence from the domestic financial institutions in the industry for foreign capital to come in?
Thanks so much. Shalabh.
I think we are starting from ground zero. First is, three things government needs to answer at the highest level. Where, what, and how. Where is it that you need impact investment to come in from foreign investors to flow into? So targeted focus. It's not easy to, doesn't serve anybody to have a wishy-washy discussion around impact investment in all sorts of landscapes where state government, philanthropies, central government anyway is pushing concessional money. So where is it that you really want it to flow? Second is, in what form do you want it to flow? As I mentioned earlier, impact investment is not just about impact, but also about having financial returns. So if you are targeting international capital, they would, in addition to risk-adjusted return at the project level in the country, which domestic investors look at, they will layer it with political risk and macro risk, two additional risks. And forex. So you need to de-risk that and see how you will de-risk that. And the third question is how. Once you have decided where and what, then you address all the ecosystem, demand, supply, how you will do it to attract that capital. And then the answers will naturally flow. I'm not getting at the micro level, subsector level, because that will be a function of the big picture first, where, what, and how.
Thanks, Shalabh. It brings me to another question, but I'll kind of keep that for now. Dharini, why didn't you go? Yeah.
I think this is Shalabh's point, and I'm going to steal it. It's the playbook point, and I think this is top priority, and then regulations that actually work in tandem to that. and right hand knowing what left hand is doing and working together rather than in different directions. I think that would be one of my top points. And then second one is the one that we talked about earlier a little bit. I think we tend to confuse ESG compliance with sustainability. One is compliance, one is strategic. And sustainability or impact, I think both of these things are actually very strategic in nature. They impact your bottom line, and unless there is strong financial return that can be made, of course there's a spectrum of what that return is, but as long as it's positive return, only then does this make sense, especially for private capital. So, people need to start thinking of this. Boards, for example, need to start thinking of this as a strategic matter, not a compliance matter. And that I think will change how industry looks at impact and what they're doing. It's not a nice to have. It's not a CSR thing. It is actually a strategic thing, which will impact the bottom line.
Thanks a lot, Dharini. Before we end, one last question leading up from what you said, very rightly so. Capital from outside, when it is coming, needs de-risking for political country level risks, and therefore it does include Forex also. But even if we keep out Forex, how do you de-risk capital coming from outside, from within India, when India itself is the risk? Right. I mean, simply put, if you're saying country risk, that itself is adding 300 basis points. So then your financial returns come in. So
I think it can be done in looking at the MDBs and players like MEGA, and that's precisely the discussion that is going on right now, is what can MDBs and MEGA, which are sitting outside the country, do in de-risking some of the macro and currency risk. There is some discussion going on with the IMF at the IMF level also, where why not have a G2G arrangement between central banks in India and central banks somewhere, where you cover some of the currency risk within a band. It will not be open, but you say, okay, if it's beyond 3%, we'll absorb it to a certain level. That's one example. Similarly, on macro and political risk, the institution MEGA, they have to be really strengthened with huge capital at the shareholder level. I was, few days ago, last week only, actually, I was with Mr. N.K. Singh, and who was the co-chair along with Larry Summers for the entire MDB reform committee. And this topic came up about how do we strengthen MEGA for the political and macro risk. I don't have a clear answer to that, but that's very
Thanks a lot. Thank you all. Thanks a lot. Thank you all very much. I think we are sticking to time. And thanks a lot for this great discussion. And thanks to ISC for hosting it. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Thuba. As always, it was great moderation and a great panel. I think we're all going back very enlightened, and we heard so many things which got reinforced again today. And we heard intentionality, we heard measurability, we heard, creating regulatory sandboxes, and how do we pilot maybe in small bits and pieces what we want to do, and then maybe scale them higher. So thanks a lot. This was a great panel. Thanks, Dhruba, Shalabh, Dharini, and so